Welcome everybody again to another episode of the ideaXme show, the show that profiles humans behind the really big ideas that are shaping our world, inspiring the future and future creators, and for all those like really great stories. I'm Ira Pastor, your life sciences ambassador along for the journey. So today we are going to be meeting again with our friends from the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency of the United States Department of Defense, also known as DARPA. But unlike the last few shows where we've been spending time with different thought leaders from the Biologic Technologies Office, today we are going to be focusing on the Defense Sciences Office, which is a group that identifies and pursues high-risk, high-payoff research initiatives across a wide range of science and engineering disciplines. And they focus on themes including, but not limited to, math, computation and design, the limits of sensing and sensors, complex social systems, and anticipating surprise, to name a few. Dr. Jiangying Zhou is joining us today, who became a DARPA program manager in the Defense Sciences Offices back in November of 2018, after having served as a program manager in the Strategic Technology Office since January of 2018. Her areas of research include machine learning, artificial intelligence, data analytics, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance exploitation technologies. Prior to joining DARPA, Dr. Zhao was a senior engineering manager in the Information Sciences Division at the Teledyne Scientific and Imaging Company. During her 10-year tenure there, she worked on many contract R&D programs for the U.S. government, including areas of sensor exploitation, signal and image processing, and pattern recognition. She also served as director of R&D at Sumis Incorporated, a small startup that specialized in contract engineering projects for the U.S. DoD and commercial customers in the area of video and image compression, pattern recognition, and computer vision. Dr. Zhao began her career as a scientist at the Panasonic Company in Princeton, New Jersey, where she conducted research in the areas of document analysis, handwriting recognition, image analysis, and information retrieval. She received her Bachelor of Science and her Master of Science, both in Computer Science from Fudan University, a doctorate in Electrical Engineering at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. And Dr. Zhao is a member of the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineer Society, and also a member of the Upsilon Pi Epsilon International Honor Society for Computing and Information Disciplines. Dr. Zhao, thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to come on the show today and talk for us for a little while.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to talk about my work with the agency, and really looking forward to the conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. Really appreciate you being here. Typically, we start off the show by handing our guests the floor for a little while. If you can just really take the mic and just talk about yourself for a little bit, sort of your background, where you grew up, how you developed your early interest in computer science and electrical engineering, and a little bit of your path to date through both industry and the government. That'll be a wonderful way to sort of lay the groundwork for everything we're going to talk about.
First, I just want to say that I came from actually the other side of the planet, from China. And I was actually born at the time and place that I had a very little exposure to science and technology during my formative ages. I never had any access to a computer or television, not even radio actually, until much later when, my first time I was able to watch a television was about the time when I was about to go to college. So, so my actual exposure to science and technology that eventually became my professional career started with the university. So the starting point when I look back was I took the university exam and entry exam, and then I need to decide which discipline that I want to study, right? So at that time, I was mostly thinking about math and physics. So that's at that time, these are the disciplines the good students would go. And but my parents actually had a different idea. So they picked the computer science for me. And at that time there was a brand new discipline for the people in China. And I would say at that time they didn't even know what the computer science really was about. They just thought it is a new discipline. It's sounding very exciting. So that's the area I should get into. And so I didn't know much about the EEA myself either. I was only 16 actually at that time. So it's sounding cool. So here I went. So I became a computer science student. And so I went to the university, and even the university at that time was still, learning about what the computer science was about. So even the curriculum is actually a reflection of this, growing understanding of this area. So even though I got a degree in computer science, I actually spent quite a bit of time, maybe half my time studying mathematics. And I had to confess that even if I had a computer science degree, I never studied operating systems or computer architecture. So those are the hard cores of the computer science courses, right? But always not lost, because mathematics is the foundation of all science. So by having a reasonably good training in mathematics, that enabled me to, in my professional career, to be able to adapt to related topics. And so I think that's actually extremely helpful. And so my initiation into the artificial intelligence field started in my master's degree. So after I finished my bachelor's degree, I decided I want to proceed with a master's degree, also in the same university. And at that time was focusing on a discipline called information theory. So again, it's math sounding kind of things. But one of the classes I took, pattern recognition. So pattern recognition actually is a sub-discipline of artificial intelligence. So this is a discipline about developing algorithms, to make computers to be able to identify patterns. And so that's something, very much like the current big data machine learning technologies that everybody's getting very excited about it. But although at that time, we neither had the big data nor had actually the proper tools to be able to analyze those big data. So the effort during that time is mostly focusing on engineering rules into the algorithms, right? So those are the rule-based pattern recognition technologies that the research was about. And so one day, the author of the textbook that I studied got invited by the university to give a lecture to the department. So he was actually, at that time was a professor at SUNY Stony Brook in the United States. And he was a very well-established researcher, internationally recognized expert in pattern recognition and artificial intelligence. So I was really, really excited to meet somebody that I was studying. And so I chatted with him, and I decided I want to pursue a PhD under him. And so I then applied the PhD program from SUNY Stony Brook, became the student doing the study under him. So that's how I came over here and essentially started my research in the artificial intelligence domain. And so now, after I graduated got my PhD, my professional career, I had 3 different jobs, about all as a researcher in applied, industrial applied research domains, right? So my first job was with Panasonic, a research lab in Panasonic. It's based in Princeton, New Jersey. And I was doing pattern recognition, document analysis, and OCR, optical character recognition. So the research that done by the community optical character recognition eventually made it into the post office. So you know that all the letters nowadays are automatically scanned for the most part, right? So essentially the technologies are matured into our daily life. We right now even didn't think about it, how the post, this huge amount of letters are all successfully automated, sorted, no matter how what kind of handwritings, how bad it is. Really exciting to me that you see that the research that you're doing not only scientifically interesting, but also contributes to everybody's daily life, and it's really satisfying. And that actually also, similar things happened in my second job. So I then moved down to South Carolina to join my future husband. So I joined a startup company founded by a math professor from University of South Carolina. And he was a leading researcher in wavelet theories and wavelet compression. So these are the technologies that people use to compress image data. And so, now in almost all the images that in your cameras are compressed by a standard called the JPEG 2000 that was wavelet based. So that's another example that, in the area you're doing research, you eventually, mature the technologies to the point that it just worked into everybody's daily life and making everybody, the technology is working better for us. So that's, to me, that is, it is a satisfying combination of being able to explore science and technologies, and to then also see that some of those got into help enhance and people's life. So now my connection to Darpa was started actually with my third job, with Teledyne Scientific. So Teledyne Scientific traced its lineage to Rockwell Science Center. So that was initially part of a research center that's part of the Rockwell International. That company eventually split into three parts. So Rockwell Science, so that's, that was the Teledyne Scientific, and Rockwell Automation, and Rockwell Collins, I believe. That these are the three different parts. And then Rockwell Science eventually was bought by Teledyne Technologies Incorporated. Now, the interesting part about Teledyne Scientific is that it is actually one of the fewer remaining industrial research labs in the United States. So some of those famed research labs like Bell Labs or Xerox PARC, they either completely transformed themselves or they, fell through, were along the wayside because the paradigm shift of technologies. Mm-hmm. But Teledyne kept its research root and soldiered on as principally as a contract research company, and by mostly doing research with Darpa. So when I joined the company, 60% of the company's business was with Darpa. So we have multiple research programs as a performers actually to working for Darpa. So that's how I actually initially got to know Darpa was as a performer. So I came to the agency constantly to attending program meetings, presenting program status reports, attending industrial days, talk to the PMs, trying to figure out what PMs want, writing proposals, so all those interesting things. So one day, then eventually the agency asked me whether I might want to consider to switch side to work from the other side to become a program manager. So I mean that's really it is a once in a lifetime opportunity to to become a Darpa program manager. Both. So that's how I actually became a program manager. So I started with the Strategic Technology Office. So that's because most of the program, as a performer, actually, I had multiple programs with that office. But my background is artificial intelligence. So DSO is the office, is one of the two offices that actually had a huge focus in this particular area. So I migrated to a defense science office. So that's kind of my story. It's a long way, starting from a place that I had no access to technologies now to a place that is solely focusing on the cutting edge technologies. It is fascinating and very exciting, and I really enjoyed my time here. Both in terms of the kind of responsibilities that the work we do, and the potential consequences. There's a huge potential impacts that the work we do, and also the kind of people and smart ideas you got into in contact with. Just it's unprecedented. So it is a great job, and it is a challenging job, but it is it is very exciting.
I've talked to other program managers at Darpa. I'm always amazed by just sort of everything that you're working on within this small time window. And, I look at yours and I see sort of a division, sort of this, a series of projects related to sort of this, what we've talked about a little bit, this third wave AI. We'll get into that in a little bit. But one of the more fascinating areas to me, having sort of from the sort of biologic background, is that, although you have all this expertise in math and electrical engineering and computer science, that there's a very interesting biologic theme under a part of your portfolio. I put this as sort of, I classify this as sort of biomimicry. I don't know if that's the proper term, but you have two very fascinating projects. One entitled Nature as a Computer, where you talk about the amazing ability of certain natural processes like protein folding and so forth, which happens, at milliseconds, very accurately. Also, there's something called the Microbrain Project, where you look at these miniature the brains of organisms like insects, which even today are probably more sophisticated than the supercomputers we have. And sort of, could you take us on a little bit of a journey between sort of this concept of how you're looking at nature to understand these amazing processes and ultimately translate them into some of these information technology tools down the road.
So the connection actually is not that hard to see. So, both the first example of intelligence is from biology, right? We humans and animals actually are both intelligent creatures. And so we are talking about artificial intelligence, one of the source of inspirations will be biology. So that's part of the reason that you're talking about biomimicries. And also, even when you're talking about computation, so that's the other aspect of my interest. Even in computation, I'm making an argument that the nature actually is doing computation. So that's the purpose. So it's kind of the inspiration for these two programs. So the nature is a computer program, for example, is trying to leverage actually the kind of computation that the nature is doing and see whether we can harness that and engineer that to help to solve the problems, the hard problems, computation problems that we have. So just to give an example that we know, for example, that when the light propagates in space, right? So when you encounter particles in space, it interacts with it and it scatters, right? And those kind of scatterings actually are very complex. If you have a complex structures, in free space, then the light will interact with each other and in very complex ways. Now, the scientists actually have been spending centuries trying to understand the physics behind it, and they developed exquisite equations to describing how the light interacts in those kind of materials, and the intricate patterns, mathematical models. So one of the model is called the Schrodinger's equation. Is basically trying to describe how light interacts. Now that's one way of looking at is to try to understand the laws of natures of in natural process, but you can actually look the other ways. You can say is that in fact the nature is doing the computation of those equations, right? So that's how you see it. If you look at the other ways, we can claim that the dynamic process of nature is in fact doing research, and not doing research, doing computations. So the question then is that can you engineer the materials so that you can match the dynamic process that's done by the nature to the problem that you want to solve? So if I can make this match together, then you actually can potentially achieve very, very efficient computation for free. Actually, that's the idea actually. Right, so because the light, when it propagates through the material, it will interact whether you like it or not, and typically it does not require extra powers to get it going. Unlike using a computer, you have to power it, right? So that process is taking place spontaneously. So if we can somehow map our problem to those process, then you almost can achieve a computation for free. So that's kind of the inspiration behind the nature of the computer program. So just to give you an example, why there's a possibility that this kind of mapping could take place. So one of the big problem that people wanted to solve is the modeling turbulence. So as I think most people know that as airplane flies, the air interacting with the surface of the airplane causes turbulence, right? And these turbulence actually could be dangerous because it can cause the airplane to instabilities with the airplane. If it's not managed very carefully, then it will crash the airplanes. Now, so the question is then is that if you could model the instabilities, the onset of these instabilities at a very early on stage, then you potentially could counteract to it. And then it can enable you to maneuver the airplane much more aggressively. But the problem with that is that these turbulence, so those are the, if somebody can actually visualize how the air, because air is not visible, but if you manage to visualize it, those turbulence actually made of those eddies. Those are basically swirling patterns, right? And those eddies actually have a different scales. Some of those eddies are very small, just a couple centimeters. Other eddies are very large, a couple meters, right? Now, to fully modeling this, from small eddies to very large eddies means that you have to have a lot of sensors to cover this whole spatial scales. And that basically means that you have a very large simulation you have to do that involves terabytes of data points. And so that makes it very computationally expensive to do the computation. And that is the current digital computer actually has difficulty to complete the simulation in fast enough, because turbulence happens very fast. So if you 6 seconds later, it doesn't matter, right? Because it's already too late. So the question is whether there's a possibility to have a different way of doing the simulation. And so that's where this light interaction with matter comes in, because the interaction of the light in engineered metamaterial matters. So we can engineer nanostructure matters, structures into materials to allow the light to interact. And now that interaction, the physics, if you write out the equations, are similar to the turbulence equations that people have been studying. Now, these are not exact, but they are similar. So the question is, could you actually create a mapping, somehow map your turbulence problem into the ways, into those material structures, so that you essentially convert your problem to this, into this interactions with the material. Now the light, travels the speed of light. That's the fastest things possible. So that you can actually do the interaction very extremely fast and very quickly. So that's the dream of this nature of the computer program, was trying to investigate whether is that possible to engineer materials, how, and what are these mechanisms that you could use to map these problems that you want to solve to those kind of natural processes in the physics, that so we can actually harness the dynamics that is taking place in nature to solve the problems that we want to solve. So that's kind of the gist of the nature of the computer program. The microbrain program, on the other hand, it actually is focusing a slightly different angle. That's actually closer to your biomimicry concept. So that program, the vision of that program was initiated by another Darpa PM, Mark Fiddy. So most of Darpa PM's tenure is limited, right? 3 or 4 years, right? So a lot of times you almost never actually got to see your program finish. So I inherited that program after he finished his tour with Darpa. And the vision of that program is to see whether we can imitate some of those efficiencies that the biological creatures exhibit, that we actually have a hard time to accomplish the same kind of efficiencies. So an example is there's this little tiny parasitic fly in nature, and they're very, very small. They are a couple of 100 microns in size. Okay. So that's like, it's 1/5 of a millimeter. So really you cannot see, right? And these flies have a very tiny brain, meaning that there's 1,000 neurons. Their brain actually only is made of 1,000 neurons. That's why microbrains. That's the name of this program is coming from. But they still are able to have this amazing response to the environment, to be able to find food, to be able to survive, to be able to evade their enemies, and to be able to propagate. So there's a lot of intelligence that these type of creatures exhibit, and they are able to do, pull off all those feats, survive the pressures of evolution, and with a very efficient power consumption. They only consume tiny amount of power. Unlike the supercomputers that we use today, it's megawatts, right? So the microbrain program then is trying to investigate into how the nature learn its intelligence so efficiently, and can we imitate some of those processes? So that's the inspiration for the microbrain program. And so one interesting observation that some of the performers from these programs made was this recognition that so we are talking about in artificial intelligence, machine learning, you give a big data, I learn to associate patterns. This is mostly actually trying to you can say this mostly trying to develop this software given the hardware. But in biology, on the other hand, the evolution. So we, the species, every generation that the slightly change of their body design. So via the eons of evolution, the shape of a lot of the creatures change. So you can say that. So this is actually the term called phylogenetic. So you can see that this basically biology is learning to modify its hardware via the generations. Now, during each of the creatures' lifetime, then they also learn, just like people, right? We grow up, we study, we got to be smarter. We also then modify our brain's neurological connections, right? So to also be intelligent. So it seems like there's two different type of learning involved. One, in one cycles there you're trying to be intelligent by modified hardware, but then during the the lifetime of the creature, you learn to interact with the world to modify the software aspect, how the neurons are connected with each other. And that's not the same. Currently our artificial intelligence designs are usually you assume architecture, hardware, and then you do these algorithms. Those are software, right? So there seems to be something different that's taking place in nature, in biology, that we might actually lift a page and trying to see, how do they do it? Can we mimic the same way to make the artificial intelligence be more capable and learn quicker and more efficiently? So that's the kind of gist of of that particular program. So there's a different performance actually looking at analyzing both the evolution of different species and also looking into how the neurons are connected in those tiny insects. And part of the reason actually it's easier to study the insects is because you have smaller number of neurons, so you have a better chance to model them fully. Is to derive the principles, so that we can imitate, in the digital domain. So it's a very, very fascinating program, actually. Some discoveries coming from that program. It's extremely fascinating.
It sounds like it. It's startling just listening to you go through it. But in anticipation of the show today, I was listening to an episode of the Voices from Darpa that you were on, and where I think it's a couple months ago,
Yeah.
and you're talking, because you just mentioned sort of these flies, but there was this theme about symbioses, and you were talking about sort of this concept of creating artificial intelligence at some point, that it could be not just useful to the researcher, but as this sort of equal, trusted collaborator. And you go into some very interesting themes about creating AI that I wrote here that could understand fundamental laws of nature, that can explore unknowns on their own. And then also you mentioned AI systems that know what they don't know. So they can find a pattern, but they might draw a wrong conclusion or so forth. And then you mentioned in the podcast Dr. Catano over at Sony and his could an AI win the Nobel Prize at some point in the future? You have two really what I'll call these bleeding edge research, but really fascinating projects along these lines. One called TAMI, which stands for Time Aware Machine Intelligence, where you talk about giving the AI an ability to think in and about time when it's doing various tasks. And then CAML, or Competency Aware Machine Learning, where you are looking to make an AI system aware of how competent they may be about something. I'll give you the floor on this one. Which one you want to start with, or where you want to go? You have as long as you want, but please take us into some of this. Well, I would call science fiction, but it's just really amazing, and walk us wherever you want to walk us with this.
Sure, definitely, yeah. So maybe I will start from TAMI, because this is the newest program.
Okay.
Actually, I haven't even started. We are just finished the source selection. So the TAMI, so all these have to do with actually how do we develop AI technologies that not only can support the kind of capabilities of this, recognize, we'll be seeing in the news that self-driving cars, all those different things, but also to do more sophisticated work and to be truly a trusted human partners, but also to make it actually work to integrate with human societies better in terms of actually, following the same principles and our ethic principles and ethic conventions, right? So Tammy, that program, the initial inspiration actually came from an article I read last year, I think, from a Wire magazine, actually. So the author of that article basically said is that the next big hurdle challenge for AI is to make AI forget and have the ability to forgive. So so that, so after I read the article, so the point actually the author was making is that AIs are moving towards becoming really sophisticated, right? So in the past, when I was doing my PhD, the pattern recognition, we craft the rules into AI systems to make them to discover patterns. So so that's basically means is that we actually know exactly what AI is doing. Now with this big data-based machine learning, the AIs are trying to figure out the rules completely on their own. And they are very capable and very sophisticated. They are trying to figure out those rules themselves, but the problem is then become opaque. And also it is relying on a lot of data. So so the question then is, what exactly the AIs are basing their decisions on, and whether these decisions, the basis are solid, actually aligned with our, democratic society's principles and our ethics actually is questions, right? So there's a lot of calls right now, about ethical AIs. And so for the, the author pointed out this is especially potentially a challenge for the future generations. For our generation, so we always worry about a lot of data is collected off us, and AIs are making decisions, some decisions in some aspect of our life for us. But in the future generations, a lot more data will be collected off them, and a lot of important decisions in their life. Which college do they want to go? What credits that you have? All those things are probably we're basing on this big data analytics. So the question then is that how? So in human, our experience with the world is always dynamic, right? So we know that the living creatures, are born and die, and we change. Our knowledge about the world also change. So we in our dealing with each other in the societies, we allow this possibility of change. Now imagine that if an AI system that you just ingest, a lot of data starting from your use of the day you're born to now, and what happened if, for example, ingested, you had a useful discretion somewhere, and you changed, and you're a better person now. But AI doesn't right now. The current AI mechanism does not have the ability to separate some of those properties that is, that should be considered persistent, and others that will evolve and change. So to allow humans to meaningfully inquiry actually about whether the AIs are basing on the decisions that for us, that is on the data that is, that is ethical, or that is sound, and that is actually aligned well with our way of dealing with each other. So when I read that article, then that got me to think about it. What does it? So from technology perspective, those ethical problems are for the society to wrangle with and to decide. But from technology perspective, we basically wanted to develop capabilities into the AI systems. At least we provide the possibility for the AI systems to tell, to describe how the internal decisions are made, and what piece of information is considered permanent, what piece of information is considered dynamic and will evolve in nature. So that's this time-aware machine intelligence program is about. So these kind of running. I guess I have, the camel program had a similar themes. Is that I'm interested in is not only making AIs to do the tasks we ask them to do, but I wanted to develop a form of a higher intelligence. I call it meta intelligence, to understand itself, to be able to describe itself, and then to be able to then communicate to the users, to the humans, that how these AI internally are learning their principles, learning their behaviors, and what are the basis for their decisions. So the time where machine intelligence about separating the properties you learn from the data. Let's say we wanted to, let's say we want to, design an AI system to understand, the concept of vehicle, right? And there are certain properties about the vehicle, this essentially are intrinsic to the concept of vehicle. So generally it should have 4 wheels and a box on top of it. If you fundamentally change that, you may not call that a vehicle anymore, right? But there are certain properties are just, style changes or technology changes that evolve over time, right? So the shape of the passenger's box and the style of the wheels, they all will evolve over time. And so we want an AI system when they are learning the concept to be able to separate these two aspects. The concept that's intrinsic that shouldn't change over time, because otherwise we'll fundamentally change the concept, and then the properties that will evolve and are only valid for a different period of time. And by separating, internally to enable AI to separate these two properties about the concept about the world, then will enable us to reason actually in time, about time, so that we would make a better use of the AIs. And also actually enable AI, the systems to be more efficient, because if the AI can do that, then it will age better. Right, because as the AI systems are deployed, and after a period of time, some of the notions about your objects or knowledge get outdated, and if the AI has actually internally a sense of time, then it actually can shift can essentially readjust its knowledge about the external world, and it doesn't have to be trained all the time. Because that's actually, it's getting very expensive right now to retrain AI all the time when something changed outside the world. So that's kind of I guess how it motivated this program. Obviously the program hasn't started, so I'm really looking forward to. I actually see a lot of really original ideas responding to the call for proposals. I'm really looking forward to see how this actually eventually will fold out. The CAMEL actually it is a currently executing program. It's also about meta intelligence, right? So the CAMEL is called competency aware machine learning. So this is actually the program wanted to develop mechanism into AI systems, so they can essentially kind of having an introspective capability. So AI is mostly designed to do a task, right? To recognize an object or to drive the vehicles. And so I wanted it to have the ability for the AI systems, when they are learning these tasks, also analyze what they have learned, and tell the users actually under what condition you're going to behave in what ways, and what is your confidence of doing accomplish the task that you're asked to do. So one of the use cases that I often mention that for most people that probably can easily relate to is let's say you have an autonomous taxi cars, right? So right now when you walk up to a taxi, you check the driver's profiles. You look at their ratings. You just trying to see whether this is a reliable driver, this is a conservative driver, this is whether they've driven in cold weathers, or they've driven in complicated terrains. And you probably will make a decision whether I'm going to pick this guy or this guy. It's just depending on what you actually want to do. The current AI system does not have that ability. Cannot tell you that, well, I've been driven, have driving, over snowing weathers numerous times. I'm pretty sure I can do the job. Or that I have never driven in the night before, and you probably, I probably need your supervision input. I need some help from you. So this is the kind of, eventually I want to have this kind of interactive capabilities for the AIs, not only to do their job, but also to communicate, to interact with their users, so that jointly they can actually be more efficient and safer to do the work. So that's what the camel is about, and is to to imbue into the AI system these kind of capabilities, so that it would talk back basically to humans to tell us actually how they do it. So because this actually also has a significant implications for, especially actually for the a lot of the DoD missions, right? So in the DoD missions, not only how whether you can accomplish the task is important, how you do it is also important, because you might think this will get you from A to B successfully, but the way the AI system is doing it may engender, for example, your fellow partners' life, then probably is not preferred. The commanders may prefer a different tactics, for example. So having the AI system to express these kinds of capabilities to describe their behaviors under the conditions would be very useful to have a better, to improve the mission success. So that's the other motivation for the camel program.
Very cool. Very interesting. Along those lines, I know, offline, I know that when we're interacting with you and Eric, you mentioned some other new ideas that you may have in so-called pushing AI to be a better partner. And so I labeled this sort of in my notes here, sort of what's next for Dr. Zhang. Not that I'm pushing you out of Darpa already, but understanding that every program manager at Darpa has sort of a limited time to get all this done. Could you take us on a little bit of, I'm not saying post-Darpa visions yet, but if you could take us sort of a little bit, what you foresee in the coming years, and then also, what you may be envisioning when it comes to some of these concepts like a time-aware AI. We've discussed different AI concepts on the show in the past. An AI that may help design a drug for COVID or predict a hurricane. Are there interesting concepts that we may not be, for us here in the civilian sector, that people haven't really even thought about, right? Because that's too complicated. Some ideas that you're going to be looking at, 2022, 2023, and so forth, is sort of the next part of your journey for everything AI can do for us.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm coming from, the background artificial intelligence. So the intelligence, is a fascinating concept. It always fascinates me. What is intelligence? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's basically probably is the direction I eventually wanted to pursue even further, to fundamentally actually answer that question. And so one of the thinking that in my mind is that I think as the AI technologies advance, we potentially actually are seeing a different form of intelligence. That's an intelligence that's different from human intelligence. Okay. For the reason is that the artificial intelligence, they develop their intelligence based on different sensories. So we, humans are, having our intelligence basing on our visual capabilities, our senses, right? Our eyes can see, our ears can hear, and we also smell. There's a range of sensory input that help us to make sense of the world. Mm-hmm. And AI systems, on the other hand, are based on a completely different set of sensors. And that's the range of the sensory capabilities are very different from humans. And the hardware, the architecture of the AI, the artificial intelligence, also is very different from how our brains, the neurons are wired. So we are already starting to see, for example, that internally the AIs might be figuring out a form of interpretation of the world or the rules that are completely different and unexpected by humans. So, for example, I think I read some report. They were analyzing. There's a competition. The Google's DeepMind had pitting the Google goal. So they basically eventually figure out for the AI to defeat the best human players, right? And the one thing that it discovered is that the AIs, by playing against themselves, they basically, having a multiple AI players against themselves to sharpen their tactics, that they figured out a form of tactics that humans would never thought about, have not even thought about, would not even imagine, right? So we have now potentially a powerful form of intelligence that's based on different hardwares, different sensory inputs, different algorithms. So they might actually see the world and understand the world differently than us. So the question is that how do we make sense of this intelligence, and how do we make sure that the intelligence that we're successfully integrated with a human society, that we work together and we benefit from each other, and we enhance, complement each other. So that's kind of, I guess, in some ways, is an extension to this human machine teaming, right? So we will have to live with these advanced form of technologies, and it is upon the our technologists actually to really look into that and to make sure that we benefit from each other, the different perspectives about the intelligence. So that's definitely, so that's kind of a, further down the road that I think I would really interested in exploring further. So, one thing that I read, I haven't actually, if I had a chance, I probably would explore a little further, is that I think most people are probably aware that the octopus is very intelligent, right? So they can figure out, how to escape from the confined space. And so somebody was pointing out that if you want to find alien intelligence life, octopus potentially was probably the closest to, that's different from intelligence that's like the human intelligence. Yeah. For the reason is that the octopus, the neurons are distributed on their bodies. So we humans, most of the intelligence is in your brain. So all the neurons, we wire down sensory input to the brains. And the octopus, on the other hand, is a distributed form of neurons over their bodies. So they form their intelligence differently than us. So I'm really fascinated actually by there's a different way of designing and an intelligent form that whether that actually will exhibit some more capabilities and that can that we could benefit. So that's I guess that's just many of those questions that are really fascinating that I would like to look into further actually even after my tenure with the agency.
Outstanding. Yeah. Outstanding. Thinking about, once again, I brought this up offline, but love to have a couple of minutes of your thought. Obviously, we've seen a lot in the press recently of companies and organizations that are trying to mimic the Darpa model. Obviously, it's an amazing model. You get these amazing thought leaders like yourselves. You give them resources and let them run with cutting edge projects like this, obviously not forever, but for a short period of time. One of the ones that comes to mind is this one that the Wellcome Trust recently set up, a couple $100 million into something called Wellcome Leap, where they're sort of looking to create a DARPA for healthcare. Having spent time both in the agency and also in the private sector, just to give us your top line on how you think the DARPA model may be very useful in some of these different fields, whether it be healthcare or energy or other sort of endeavors, once again, for all of us in the civilian sector.
Yeah, so I will start by saying DARPA is unique. And many different places are trying to mimic or replicate DARPA's models. And oftentimes they're not very successful. So there's actually already multiple agencies actually trying to mimic DARPA. So the ARPA-E, for example, right? So the Department of Energy has an agency called ARPA-E. So that's kind of built on trying to mimic the DARPA's model. And there's another in biology, another federal agency also has a DARPA-like structures to focusing on pushing the the research in biologies, and there's multiple different countries actually, even in my interactions with some of those international performers like Japan and Singapore, they all wanted to imitating the Darpa success. And so I think so my view is that one is that each so there's a reason why Darpa is successful, and the essence of this probably that the industry probably can borrow, but the Darpa is also unique in its own ways. It may not be completely replicable. So for example, so Darpa's mission is to push the boundary of science and technologies, right? And the way Darpa set it up is that it does not actually have a overarching plan. So it is dependent on each of the individual PMs to, so is their ideas, they trust the PMs, is their ideas that move and shape the technology's development. So, you see that on the Darpa website, Darpa has this AI Next campaign that you're trying to advance the AI technologies to the third wave AIs. And sometimes people will say, so what is the agency's AI Next campaign vision? And the answer is on PMs. It is their passions, their visions that drive and shape. Now, this may or may not be completely possible when you are talking about different environments and different settings, because that's basically is whether that this kind of setup is completely replicable is a question that the industrial space and whoever that wanted to do that also wanted to take a look. But I think it is the essence of the agency success is that to ask hard questions and to do a rigorous homework. I think in one of your interviews with some other PMs, some of the programs could take 1 or 2 years to come to eventual fruition. You see the BAs. It took a very rigorous effort to answer some of those seemingly hard questions, hard mark questions, that to really put together the program that is well defined in terms of their objectives and in terms of how the success should be measured and how the program should be structured. So those things I think is applicable to to anybody that that wanted to imitate some aspect of a success, because I think this rigor is forcing the PMs to think through the problem. So a lot of times the PM started with a vision, right? So that vision generally is very high level and it's kind of exciting, but it is a little bit vague in terms of what concretely you want to do. And because if you are not articulating your vision concretely, then the performers will have a hard time responding to what you're asking for. So you might actually get, propose ideas that are really, it's the opposite of what you're asking for, right? So this kind of rigorous process of articulating the program concept and their details and what the success should look like, I find it's extremely useful for me actually to force myself to be vigorous and to be careful and to think through that what I really want to do. I wanted to make AIs to be better humans or make AIs to understand the time, but can you define the time computationally so that there's a way to implement them? Because there's a philosophical concept about time, but these are just philosophy that you cannot realize them actually, right? So to really clearly carefully define those concepts so that there's a way, concrete ways to get there is something that I consider useful and probably will benefit actually by share that with a broader space with other agencies or other fields.
Wonderful, wonderful. I appreciate that. Coming back to you, we typically pose a question as we wrap up the show about sort of important mentors and influencers that you've had. Obviously, you've been in academia, in industry, now in government. Obviously, you met lots of people. You don't have to go through everybody, but if there's specific people that you may want to mention, shout out to at this point that really kept you on this path in both the good times and the bad of, some of this cutting edge research. Any specific people you want to mention at this point?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I'm glad that you give me these opportunities. So, as I look back, I often sometimes look back at my professional career, and I think there's a couple of people made it's pivotal actually to make me a researcher the way who I am. So I was started by mentioning my thesis advisor, Theo Pafilidis. So he's a well-known researcher in the AI domain. So, but that aside, as a student study under him, I learned never to make an excuse for any shortcomings that I have. So because he is actually very strict, and so as a foreign student coming from a different country, I initially in the first couple of years, you had a hard time writing technical papers that are grammatically correct and all those things, right? But he always said you have no excuse just because you are a foreign student. It's not an excuse for not writing your papers well, because the university has English department. You can always get help. Right, so he's always make sure that we do not find excuse for anything, any shortcomings, any mistakes we make. So that's the first lessons I learned, is that you should always, if you made a mistake, you should always find a way to improve better, not trying to find excuse just because I'm tired, I'm just English is not my first language, all those things. I think that basically force you to be better. To trying to improve yourself. So that's basically the first lessons learned. And the second is my boss, my first job at Panasonic, Dan Laplasty. I think from him, I truly learned what does it mean to do science. So he's actually he's very rigorous. So I remembered that my first paper I wrote, that I wrote my draft, I gave it to him, and came back with red markings everywhere. And now it's not, his editings are not just about the English. His editings about making sure I describe my experiments carefully and completely, so that if somebody wants to replicate the experiments, to validate my results, you have the complete information. He also insisted that I should always report negative results, not just the positive. That's one of the common things people do in publications. They felt, good papers, you should always you hide the negative ones and you publish the good ones. But he insisted that if some things did not work, you also should discuss that. So I think he actually was really a true mentor for me to understand what does it mean to be rigorous in science, and to pay close attention to the details, and to essentially be honest about the results. So I think that made me a better scientist. So I always very thankful, actually, as in my first job, as starting after I graduated from the university, that I had a really good mentor to get me into my professional career well. And so the third, I would say, is some of those colleagues, the research colleagues that I bumped into, I interacted with, both when I'm still working in the industrial domains, as well as in Darpa, is that I had a colleague. He was at that time a researcher from Bell Labs, Henry Belt, and I really admired his way of writing scientific papers. I found actually his paper not only scientifically, it's rigorous, but it's even aesthetically beautiful to read. But one thing I noticed from his writing is that he used very little adjectives. So he never say something like, this is a great success, or this is a big improvement. You always quantify your results. You don't simply say this is a big improvement. You say this, improved by 3.5, folds, right? So I learned that when doing science, um, facts you want let the facts speak,
Right.
not stay away from any hand wavings and any kind of a kind of commercial kind of tendencies. Sometimes people get very excited, say, "Well, this is going to has a huge impact on in the field," but quantify huge. So those are, I think, I by watching some of those really good researchers doing their research and talk about their research, and so I learned, some of those uh, uh, I guess subtleties about what is being a good scientist. And with the agency, these HAMA questions, I think it's extremely good training. It is such a simple set of questions, and it's so hard to answer correctly. And I really benefited by always going through that process, and it forced me to think much more rigorously and carefully. And so those are the really, I would say the whole agency, Darpa as agency, by forcing all the PMs going through, answer those questions, and actually very critical about every time you go up to pitch your program, you get a lot of questions if sometimes like a seemingly simple question you cannot answer, right? So so those are the good trainings that I always benefited from, my fellow scientists and researchers in their way of doing science. That I hope that I can, that made me a better researcher myself. So that I just actually really thankful that you bring that up. So I had an opportunity to say a few words and thank their influence on me actually as a researcher.
Absolutely. Everyone is everyone needs someone else has help along the way, and I that's why we talk about that, and it's important to demonstrate that in each of these conversations. One final question that just came to mind before I let you go, and it's thinking back to the beginning of your career with Panasonic and the post, your ability to create these technologies to get all the mail in the right place. Is anyone ever going to create an artificial intelligence can find all the lost mail? Because I think that would be amazing. That would be $1 trillion industry that you.
That's actually is a very, very good question.
Where did it go?
Yeah, where did it go? Exactly. Yeah.
And so in time too.
Exactly, because that tied to this dealing with unknowns, right? Because if it's a lost mail, you do not know it's lost. So can you figure out that something's lost? That would be the first question, because that's one of the programs I talked about how do you deal with unknowns, because that's the hardest part is you don't even know what questions to ask to get to unknown. So hopefully that with some of those efforts that both the agencies and the communities are doing, we're taking some steps to be able to eventually help you out. For example, questions like this. Yeah.
Well, really wonderful stuff, and really appreciating the time. For everybody that's going to be watching this particular episode on the YouTube channel or listening on the various podcast networks, you've been listening to the amazing Dr. Jiangying Zhou, Darpa Program Manager in the Defense Sciences Office, doing really amazing things to create artificial intelligence and machine learning that is aware, competent, insightful, and trusted. Dr. Zhao, thank you for taking the time to come on the show. Thank you for everything you've been doing and continue to do for your Darpa duration and afterwards. And as we say, thank you for moving the human story forward a little bit. It's been really a wonderful time having you and very insightful.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, for the opportunity actually to talk about the work, and hopefully that share some of those stories and excitements with the communities. Thank you.